very warm welcome to this dialogue tonight, between Dr. Marc Gafni and Andrew Cohen. Very happy to see you all, and welcome, Andrew and Marc. Very excited to hear you talk about the topic of the evolution of God, or evolutionary perennialism. So this is a topic very close to my heart too, and I'm very curious what will happen tonight in this beautiful dialogue. And before I hand over to Marc to start the dialogue, I would like to give you a little bit of an overview how we do these calls normally. So Andrew and Marc will have a dialogue for a time, and then they will open up for questions, and you will be able to write your question in the chat box of the Zoom window that you find at the bottom of Zoom. Most of you, I'm sure, know how this works. And then either myself or Krista will read the questions out loud, and then Marc and Andrew will respond to them. And I think that's already everything I had to say, and I'm very happy to hand over to you, Marc.
So first of all, it's great to be here, and thank you everyone for coming. And I really could not be more thrilled to be here. And generally, I begin by commenting on Andrew's shirt, which has been our general kind of comment, and he never disappoints. He always has a great shirt. I'm always slightly jealous, and then I have to go to kind of like a couple of weeks of therapy for kind of shirt jealousy. That's a great shirt, and it's good to see you, my friend. Oh, we can't hear you.
You're muted, Andrew. You have to unmute yourself, please.
I said, thank you. Nice to see you, sir.
He always, by the way, everybody, he always avoids kind of responding to my shirt comment. He's consistent, and he's just like, it's very cool, but he likes that I like his shirt. I'm just saying he won't share that with you. He might not even crack a smile, but he does. Okay. It's great to be together. It's great to be together. And I'm going to begin. Andrew and I generally switch who's going to begin. So I'm going to begin this time. And this is either our last or second to last dialogue. I'm not sure which one, but it's around there. We're kind of finishing this. We're towards the conclusion of this dialogue series. And I just want to say before we start, now I'm going to be very, attentive to detail here. I'm going to pay attention. It's 11:08. So I'm just going to say a minute about just, just how important I think this series has been, right? And I don't use the word important lightly. It's been enjoyable. It's been deep. It's been delightful. Andrew and I have, at least for every dialogue, at least talked at least once before. So there's been another set of kind of conversations that come with it. Daniela, Krista, it's been, it's just greatly delightful to be with you and held by you and in the whole space. And just so it's been a really important space. I actually looked last night, about 1,500 people all in all have participated in the dialogues over the last, couple of years, right? So it's great. It's just been a beautiful process. And I think there's been real deepening. We're not going to turn this into kind of a formal, restructured, workbook, but we will at least share a kind of set of oral essays with people. So you'll have this kind of sense, these kind of, at some point. And it's been just a really, really important dive. And as Andrew said to me on a few days ago when we were talking, we both feel co-responsible. Well, that's not the word you used, brother, but, we feel co-responsible in a very deep way, right? A kind of omni-responsibility for the sake of the whole to put these understandings in the world. Right?
Absolutely, very much so. Very much so.
Right, very right. This is not a casual conversation. There's both an urgency to the conversation. There's an ecstasy, but there's also a holy desperation, if I can use that word, right? We're at a desperate moment in time in which we're both filled with the immense beauty and gorgeousness of reality. And we're also filled, Andrew, with the desperation of this moment, in so many ways. And we have this great abiding trust, confidence, right, in the larger goodness of reality. And yet we stand face to face with both immense human capacities for virtual utopias. We could actually create the most beautiful, true, and good world that could possibly be created. And yet we're also on the brink of potential dystopias, which are very, very real. And so I just want to just begin with that. I spend a good part of the week with close colleagues that work close with the Center for World Philosophy and Religion, a couple of adjacent organizations. I won't mention the name, but all of you know most of those people. And part of the job was a group of people had in our circle had essentially organized and collated and integrated all the risk reports in the world. What are those of risk reports, right? And when you actually look at the level of peril, right? And then you integrate all the risk reports and you kind of get out of the kind of surface conversation. Andrew, brother, the level of peril is so immense that you actually can't but conclude that, that phrase, but for the grace of God.
Absolutely.
But that it hasn't collapsed. It is but for the grace of God. And when you experience that level of peril, and yet at the same time, that level of promise, right? And there's a potential, right? There's a potentiality, there's a promise, and so as we're poised between this peril and promise, we're poised between utopia and dystopia, right? What's going to carry us forward is, I call it, we each have our own name for it. I call it a new story of value, a universal grammar of value rooted in the field of value. And at the very, very core of this notion of the field of value is this notion of what I would call evolutionary perennialism, which is not unrelated to your beautiful term, Andrew, evolutionary enlightenment, back in the day when you put that beautiful book out. And by the way, if I can, this is not for the sake of book sales, this is for the sake of loving and sharing, right? There's a book that Zach Stein, myself, and Ken Wilber just put out called First Principles and First Values, which I would really encourage everyone to get. I would encourage everyone to get Andrew's original book, Evolutionary Enlightenment, and read those together. Read those together. It's actually a great experience, and just want to invite everyone to do that in terms of kind of an enormous deepening of this conversation. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump in. So those are the first, that was 5 minutes introduction. And then I'm just going to take, maybe 5-6 minutes, and again, we're going to watch the clocks here to try and just begin to unpack this. And what I think we'll do is we always do is we'll take blocks of time kind of sharing with each other and with everyone, and then take questions at the end. So we're talking about evolutionary perennialism, and we titled it On the Evolution of God, which is a critically important phrase. And I really want to start there. And, one of the things that live in the space between Andrew and I is friendship. And actually quite a few years we've known each other. So I remember being at Andrew's center in Fox Hollow and giving a talk there back in, it must have been 2000. And Danielle, I don't know if you were there or not there, but it was back in the day. It was back in the day, whenever the day was, right? Whenever that day was, it was back that day. And the talk was about, the title of the talk was God Needs Your Service. That was the talk, which is a phrase that comes from Meir Ibn Gabbai, who's a kind of penultimate, I call them not mystics, interior scientist, is a word I try and use with intention, of the Renaissance period. He wrote a book called Avodat HaKodesh, kind of the sacred work. And what he means is, it's so stunning. I mean, when I actually even think of sharing it with you now, I literally, not metaphorically, I feel tears welling up in my eyes, and this kind of rush of kind of my breath almost stops. And the ancient text says, Il male mikra katuv yefshar la'amro. If it wasn't realized, we couldn't speak it. Right? In other words, it's what we're about to say, right, is so shocking. And I look forward to together, Andrew, with you to kind of clarifying it, because we're coming from actually very, very different places, and we're meeting in this overlapping place. So I look forward to actually not just declaring today, but sharing and creating new knowing together. But first, I want to just start with the core. So all of Maimonides, all of Aquinas, and I'm sharing with Andrew, and as Andrew also does, and sharing with everyone, right? right, spend all of their time, these medieval schoolmen, these great realizers, these great scholastic realizers, right, spend all of their time telling us that we need to be clear that God has no needs. In the East, whether you're doing Advaita Vedanta, right, or you're doing classical, Theravada or Mahayana, and also virtually all strains of Vajrayana, all three turnings of the wheel, right? You have this notion of Buddhahood. And the core notion of Buddhahood is that Buddha is this perfection. That's why Buddha sits like Buddha does. Jews can't sit that way. We can't quite get our legs that way. We try, it just doesn't work. But there's this sense of this equanimity, there's Buddhahood, right? And this Buddhahood is beyond needs, right? It's the realm of the absolute, right? It engages the realm of the relative, but basically the notion of a core need, right, or core, desire, right? This is indicative both on the God side of the street, the Western side of the street, and on the classical Eastern Enlightenment side of the street is indicative need. I'm desiring something, right? So there's an imperfection, but I'm not in my Buddhahood, I'm not in my divinity, right? And both the East in its ways say, become Atman Brahman, become Buddha, and the West in its way says, imitate Ode, be like God, right? Which means move beyond needs and desires. And then you have this cross current of unimaginably gorgeous realization, which I've felt in my body for decades, which is this other notion, this other realization that lives in gorgeous paradoxical tension, which is God needs your service. Meaning there's some way in which, and let me see if I can say it clearly, which to be perfect, you have to be able to become more. If I can kind of just cut through, right? In other words, transformation is the quality of perfection. So if you have a child that's born perfect, and then you have a child that's born imperfect, and the imperfect child works unimaginably hard and engages in this process of transformation and gets to the place of the perfect child, and then you say, okay, which child is kind of more complete and more whole? The one was born automatically perfect or the one who perfected? Well, clearly the one who perfected. So this realization at the core of the lineage is that if divinity or Buddhahood, however you want to tell that story, is perfection, it must contain the quality of becoming more perfect, of transforming. Otherwise, it would be imperfect. It's a paradoxical, it's a very deep realization. It's a very deep realization. And we have a phrase we use in the New Story of Value, cosmologic humanism, we call it anthro-ontology, meaning go deep inside my anthro and I'll find ontology, I'll find the true nature of existence. The mysteries are within us. So what that means is that this notion that I actually need my needs and my desire, not my surface desire, my clarified desire, right, is actually my true essence. And my true essence participates in divinity. And so divinity in some way evolves, transforms, needs, desires. And here's the last step. And the dimension of divinity that needs and desires, that evolves, that transforms, is divinity in us, as us, and through us. And that's divinity disguises infinitude and then needs to become complete, needs to become whole. So at the very, very core of the hidden lineages, you won't find it in the synagogues, of the wisdom of Solomon, is this realization that God needs our service. That actually the power is with the realizer. And God loves us so madly much, or infinity desires finitude so madly much, or infinity needs finitude so madly much, that infinity, or what we would call in the language of cosmologic humanism, the infinite intimate, God, the infinite intimate, desires our service and becomes whole through our service, meaning, last sentence, right? She, he, it, divinity, the Godhead, the infinite intimate, loves us so much that she's willing to make herself dependent on us giving her power, she's willing to, in some sense, as it were, kiviyachal, we say, in the language, kiviyachal, as it were, limit her power and actually evolve through us. So she steps back, tzimtzum, she withdraws, but she's, of course, always there in the withdrawal, paradoxically. And she turns to us and says, make me more whole, make me complete, evolve me, right? I'm turning to you and saying, I love you so much that I'm making you responsible for my evolution. And that we actually, as human beings, our ultimate dignity, last sentence, is that we participate in the evolution of God. So that opens it up, right? And I'm madly delighted to turn to Andrew and take it away, brother. I'm delighted to be with you.
Thank you, Mark. That was very deep and very complex and very beautiful. So in my own way, I'll try and do the same. These are very big truths we're speaking about here. They're deep, they're fundamental, and they're, most importantly, they're not relative, but they're absolute. So we're trying to speak about the absolute truth. So I'll try to respond to everything you said from a different perspective, which would probably be more Eastern. But I agree with you wholeheartedly that God wants us to participate, and realizing that becomes a source of liberation when we awaken to have the evolutionary impulse or to evolutionary enlightenment. So to start at the beginning, before the universe was created, you could say God, which I define as the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist, is an absolute principle. So I'm defining this absolute principle as the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. And I think we could all agree that that includes everything. It includes absolute nothingness and everything else that exists in the whole creative process. So once again, God is the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. And that sum totality is, for the realizers, Mark was speaking about the great realizers, it can be an experience, a felt experience, a direct cognition, or kind of absolute transrational knowing of God, which means knowing of the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist. And it's experiences revelation, liberation from anything relative. So that what I'm describing is the kind of experience that liberates us from relative existence. So before the universe was created, there was nothing. God was an infinite, timeless, formless, infinite, beginningless, and endless, and eternal no-thingness. And we want to remember that God is perfect, fearless, doubtless, and always indestructible. So you can imagine that in his or her state of infinitely liberated consciousness, where he and she was doing absolutely nothing for eternity. He or she was free from the burden of existence and free from the burden of having to do anything, create anything, become anything. It was just eternal being, the vibration of eternal being, eternally and through eternity. So I think one can imagine this is when we have to do some anthropomorphic speculation on the nature of the God principle. So understand that I'm giving myself license to speculate from an anthropomorphic perspective, because since I'm a human, that's the only perspective I can imagine from. So I'm doing that consciously. I'm taking that leap, knowing that it's going to give me a perspective that's narrow and that's going to be limited to my human capacities. So therefore, it's going to be inherently relative and partial. Right? It's the best I can do being human. So try and imagine what it would be like to have been doing you're resting in eternal being for eternity, which basically means in human terms you've been doing nothing forever. You can imagine that you might begin to wonder what it would be like to do something if you've been doing nothing forever. So I think that at a certain point the thought arose in your no mind, I wonder what it would be like to do something. And why would God have these kinds of thoughts? Because why not? why wouldn't God think these thoughts? Because God's infinite and perfect and fearless and doubtless. So imagine these thoughts begin to arise. What would we like to do something? Because I'm doing nothing forever, and it would be the rising of the inner curiosity, a kind of way, and the curiosity would build up over countless billions of eons of no time as a desire. Marx talks about desire. It would build up as an evolutionary tension. It became pregnant with desire and curiosity. What it would be like to become something that exists as in manifest form, because God up until that point has been existing in his or her unmanifest infinitude. So this curiosity would build up and become an evolutionary tension that would build up and 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 build up. As I said, over countless billions of eons of no time until there was an unimaginable cosmic release. And that cosmic release was a leap from nothing to something, from being to becoming, from unmanifest to manifest, from non-existence to existence. And that, of course, is when the universe or the multiverse was created, came to being. So in this perspective I'm trying to share, God, and after this leap has been taken, God goes from his or her unmanifest form to becomes manifest. So now God is both the unmanifest and the manifest, the uncreated and the created. And I think it's a very profound contemplation of the nature of the absolute principle, of the God principle, and it is both being and becoming. God is both being and becoming. And the experience of God as being is the experience of peace. Because before anything ever happened, there was only peace, because nothing had gone wrong yet. Before anything ever happened, nothing can go wrong. So the experience of God as being is peace. It's unimaginable, because it's peace. It's a peace that exists prior to the thought to do anything at all. And of course, we know that in the Eastern Dharma, we awaken to the ground. It's what's called the ground of being, or what Eckhart Tolle calls the ground of being, through practices like meditation, things like Papa's encourage us to transcend the mind and transcend time. When we transcend the mind and transcend time, we discover this infinite depth and space of unimaginable being. It was only peace. But God is not only peace, God is also experienced as this creative process that's in a process of becoming. The creative process is in a state of becoming. That's what's very interesting. This is what Marc was speaking about. And the new info, or the new information for truth seekers, or has been for a while now, very few people actually really understand this, I believe, is that, oh my goodness, not only does God exist, which was in and of itself a big discovery, but God is not merely static, unchanging, eternal being, but also this overwhelming desire to become. And as being feels like peace, becoming feels like, and I know Marc likes this phrase, ecstatic urgency. So what does it feel like? What does it feel like to be the part of God that wants to exist? It feels ecstatic and urgent at the same time. It feels like Marc was talking about this desperation to participate in the creative process. That's experiences of ecstatic, unbearable urgency. And you try to give everybody a sense of what it feels like to be God as the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe, I believe, in my imperfect understanding, is constantly focused on what could be. Because God's not focused on the present moment. Because the present moment, from a godlike perspective, the present moment has always already arrived. But if you created the universe, would you be more interested in what you had already created, or would you be more interested in what you had not created yet? You'd always, in every single moment, be interested in what you had not created yet. And you'd be infinitely compelled, infinitely absorbed, infinitely inspired, infinitely attracted to what was possible, what's possible, what's possible. There's an infinite meditation. The God, the creator, is constantly compelled by what could be in every single moment, no matter what has happened. What could be is always gets closer to the perfection Marc spoke about. Now, In responding to that, I don't believe it's possible to be that perfection. It's possible to experience that perfection. And these deepest insights, these deepest experiential insights into the nature of the absolute principle, the nature of the God principle, is when we experience that perfection on its own terms. And that's when we come to our knees in awe and rapture. But that's a metaphysical vision. It's a direct insight. It's a direct gnosis. But what that inspires us to do, it inspires the most realized beings to want to make manifest that perfection that's been seen with the inner eye. I want to give rise to that perfection here in this imperfect world. I want to make the world perfect. It's a utopian impulse, the land of Shambhala. I want to create heaven on earth. And most highest realizers were always inspired by a utopian vision to create heaven on earth in one shape or form or another. And so, as similar to the way what Marc was trying to describe, we are in these enlightened visions, we find ourselves compelled to give rise, to make manifest the perfection that we experience in the inner vision, which is the ultimate nature of reality. Reality itself, seen with the inner eye, is seen as being inherently perfect. So we see what always, from this perspective, we're always seeing, if we're enlightened to the inherent perfection of the God principle, it compels us to from our perspective of ecstatic urgency, to want to give rise to that perfection in the world. And we'll never get there. But we're going to die trying. We're going to live again and again and again and again and again, trying eternally, earnestly for eternally, to make that perfection manifest. Like an unbearable compulsion to make that perfection manifest. An unbearable compulsion to make that perfection manifest. And it's like an unquenchable desire. Wholeheartedly, through a great act of spirit, religious surrender and commitment, we can experience the glory of God through not resisting that ecstatic urgency, but it'll never be fully quenched, because we're never going to get there. It's always going to be beyond our reach. But committing ourselves to that kind of ecstatic torment, you could put it that way, I guess, is a big part of what living the religious life in earnest in an evolutionary context is all about. So just to finish, I wanted to add that this revelation, this fairly recent revelation, that the God of the absolute principle is not merely static being, but is also manifest becoming. We realize that the God principle, the highest principle, the truth principle, is also evolving. It's, as Marc said, mind-boggling, infinitely mind-boggling. I've known this for 30 years now, but it's whenever I speak about it, whenever I think about it, I find myself intoxicated and dumbfounded by the enormity of what that means. It means that the creator of the universe is always becoming more perfect. And then, of course, when we also begin to embrace non-duality from that context, it means as us. And that's when it gets really interesting. If you try to live the spiritual life in earnest, it just gets really interesting, because then you have to look in the mirror and say, the essence of Vedanta says, I am that, thou art that. So that's the ultimate mystical revelation, is I am what I've been seeking for. I am the sought. But not only that, but you are also, that which you're looking for is also evolving, if possible, if you're ready for it, through you. And that's when this evolutionary Dharma becomes very interesting. We embrace this understanding of the becoming of the universe, the manifest becoming of the universe. We put ourselves right in the middle of it. I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe, recognizing and realizing itself through dividing my personality of Marc or Andrew. Could such a thing really be true? Say, no, it is true. The evolutionary impulse is awakening to itself through this body, mind, and personality right now. And the choices Andrew makes, and the choices Marc makes, and the actions Marc makes, and the actions Andrew makes are expressions of that divine principle on good days, on our best days. God is expressing him herself through us, as us, and because of us. And then finally, when you realize from the perspective of non-duality that God does not exist outside you and outside me, that we are it, if you can handle that, it's kind of spiritually unbearable, but can you handle it to know that you really are it? That God does not exist outside you, that God does not exist anywhere else other than in your own true heart, that you are it, and therefore it's up to you, including the meta-crisis situation that Marc was speaking about at the very beginning here. In the end, from a metaphysical perspective, it's completely in our hands. No matter what happens in the world, no matter what right or wrong choices anybody else makes, it's still ultimately up to us from a metaphysical point of view. So then the enormity of what it means to exist in this body, mind, and personality in this form, and to embrace the metaphysical and evolutionary implications of that are just profound beyond measure. And that's what I think this new Dharma that Marc and I have been speaking about is all about. So, thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. That was, deep, profound, and beautiful and important. And I hope everyone noticed that Andrew and I were talking about the exact same thing, but in somewhat different languages that create a larger whole, right? And in a very beautiful and in a very important way. So it's a rare moment. And, in this moment, let's see if we can we'll each build one more step, right? And it took, 17, 18 minutes to lay that out, which is, it really takes about 17,000 hours, 17,000 years, to lay that out. So let me see if I can just kind of speak into that, brother, and, kind of further clarify for the sake of sheep, right? In other words, what we're doing here is we're having a conversation, but not a conversation in the casual sense, right? Reality is a series of conversations. That's what reality is. And in other words, we live in what I would call a conversational cosmos. In the conversational cosmos, reality emerges through the clarifying conversation. By Daber, God speaks, and Logos emerges. The word for Messiah is Mashiach. Mashiach, Messiah, which is the consciousness of a possible utopia, of a world that works for everyone, of a world that we've responded to and transformed suffering. The word Mashiach, Siach, is conversation. So it means
that's what we're having. That's what we're doing.
Right. That's what we're doing. Right. We're in that conversation. We're right here. We're doing that conversation. We're trying to, if I can use a word from some of the lineages, we're bringing something down. Right. And as we're trying to articulate something, we're trying to, to articulate, it's to bring it down. Let's bring this Torah down. Let's bring this Dharma down so that it's available. And once you bring it down, and in some sense, Andrew and I have, both kind of dedicated our lives to bringing some version of this Torah down so that it exists in the world, right? And that it can actually, it can. And the reason it's so critical, it's not critical from a kind of merely scholastic metaphysical perspective. It's critical in responding to suffering. And I want to try and kind of begin from there. So the source of suffering in the world, right, the core of suffering, its overwhelming majority is human beings are acting out, is that human beings are not realizing transformation. Human beings are defaulting, right, to an experience in which they meet, in which we meet some version of the emptiness. And by the emptiness, I don't mean shunyata. I don't mean the emptiness that's ultimately full. I mean the emptiness that's empty, right? In other words, that simple emptiness. And
negative emptiness, negative emptiness.
Right, a kind of, it's called, there's many, many words for it, but it's the sense of ennui, George Steiner called it, the sense of dis-ease, right? The sense of there's nothing there. The sense of, Faulkner borrows the phrase from Macbeth, right? Life is a tale told by an idiot full of sounds and furies signifying nothing, right?
Nihilism.
Kind of nihilism, or a kind of, we realize that we're subject. There's an experience of our subjectification. And as we realize our subjectification, we experience our desubjectification, right? That it's worthless, right? That this experience of, as I experience myself as a subject, I'm shamed by a sense of desubjectification, right? What am I can't even find the worthiness of my being. And the human being is the only being for whom being is a problem, right? And as human being is the only being who problematizes their own being. But that's not a bug in the system, that's a feature. In other words, the nature of reality, and that I would say is one of the core shared understandings, right, that I've come to in my own life. Andrew, I know you've come to, and all the great real artists have come to, is that actually reality begins with the fall. Right? The Torah, the Mahabharata, right, the Bhagavad Gita, these are stories of crises. These are stories of falls, which then begin a journey, which then begin a process of transformation. So the process of transformation, right, that we experience, that we go through, right, that process is what it means to be a human being. Now let's just go slow for a second. So I experience a sense of being shamed. It's a fundamental shame. When you read the fundamental texts of Western civilization, for example, the Garden of Eden story, the Garden of Eden story is not a story of what I would call situational shame. Oh, she made a mistake. She ate from the wrong tree. The apple, shouldn't have eaten that apple. It's not situational shame, although that's how it's interpreted. It's actually ontological shame. And ontological means shame at my very subjectification, my very experience of a subject. Shame at my own fundamental lack of worthiness. I feel alienated, and I feel alienated from value. Shame is the experience of being alienated from value, or from the God field, or from possibility, or from ultimate potential, right? That's a shame comes from a sense of being powerless, a sense of being mortal, helpless, humiliation, getting my basic needs met, a kind of disgust, right? Kind of sometimes comes with shame at my own kind of ultimate infantilized powerlessness. That's the beginning. And then I walk through that, and I actually walk through that and actually experience a deeper reality. I experience a deeper truth. I experience a deeper realization, not as a gnosis, but as a kind of first-person clear realization. I begin to realize, no, I'm actually welcome in the universe. I'm actually dignified. I actually have ultimate dignity. So that experience from kind of ontological shame to a place of ultimate dignity, where I have the sense of being ultimately dignified, of being fundamentally welcome in the universe. Where does that come from? That comes from what Andrew and I are describing. In other words, unless you experience yourself as participating in the healing and transformation of reality itself, which is the healing and transformation of God, because God is reality, right? And it's not just I'm obedient to a power that tests me to see if I can rein in my impulses in the right way in order to get points in heaven. And it's a good idea to rein in impulses and transform them in all the ways they should be. That's not the point. But the point is that that's not the game. The game is transformation. The game is to become a God man, to become a God woman, to become Metatron. The lineage calls to become the human being who becomes the divine. And how do I do that? I do that by actually realizing that I'm not anything other than a direct, unique participant in the field of infinite possibility, that God is the possibility of possibility, that my unique possibility, my unique quality of desire participates in that field, and that my possibility potentiates the divine. Because I'm so potent that I have not just the possibility, but I'm capacitated uniquely to potentiate the divine. And that something emerges in divinity becomes emergent because of Andrewness, right? And that when divinity meets Andrew, when divinity meets Mark, when divinity meets Daniela, when divinity meets Krista, right? When divinity meets Pete, who's here, when Paul, right? In other words, Sahaja, right? If I pronounced it right? When divinity meets, right, Pete, and Pete is clarified and has done this very deep, deep commitment to transformation, right? Then divinity experiences in Andrew a shocking self-recognition of a new dimension of him herself that he could not realize in any other way. So that if Andrew had not gone through, if Mark had not gone through that process of breaking open, of a shvirata kelim, a breaking of my vessels, right? Until my heart opened so wide that I actually realized that I'm not just Homo sapien, I'm not just wise, I'm actually Homo amor. And I'm a unique incarnation of this infinite love intelligence and love desire and love beauty and love potential. And I actually give power, I literally empower the divine. Without that, I actually have no dignity. That's my, I don't have any dignity. It's a very subtle, it's very, I'm not dignified, right? I'm actually experiencing essentially what the last, 100 years of Western thought described the human being, right? And Martha Nussbaum in a typical Martha Nussbaum impossible to read book, right? Martha Nussbaum doesn't write books that are easy to read, but she's very good, right? She recapitulates the last 100 years of thought, right? In some sense correctly as, right? Oh, she says, what we now realize is that as human beings, we're humiliated in getting our basic needs met. And our basic experience of humiliation, right, characterizes in Kohut and Winnicott, right, and Bowlby, they're all talking about this early childhood experience. What allows us to transform that humiliation, right, into a humility that's filled with audacity, right, is when I actually realize, no, I'm actually meeting the needs of God, right? I mean, it's a shocking experience. And generally, the only place we have a place that we can genuinely experience, right, this way of kind of healing the humiliation, getting our basic needs met, is when someone turns to us and honors the depth of our needs, right? So for example, let's give you an example. It's why at the center of the lineage of Solomon, Eros and sexuality are very important, because in sexuality, our beloved says to us, your need is my allurement. In the sacred moment of the sexual, the beloved says, your need is my allurement. All of a sudden, my needs are not humiliated, they're honored. But actually, as we always say, there's 12 billion years of Eros before sex. It's not about the sexual, it's about the erotic. And in the erotic field, we realize, right, that actually, someone is turning to us, a beloved is turning to us and saying, your need is my allurement. So the realization of the evolution of God is that God turns to us and says, I need you. And we turn back to the divine and we say, your need is my allurement. And that is the Song of Solomon. That's the Song of Solomon, which is a series of outrageous love notes, which is characterized by the Talmud as sanctum sanctorum, the ultimate canonical text of Western civilization, out of which was born all of Western mysticism, the account of the chariot and everything that shaped the Renaissance and Luria, and this notion of human dignity, is that I can meet your need, God. I have the capacity to meet your need. Right? And experience, if we can just for a second, right, Andrew, like experience, brother, right, when we experience, no one needs us. If we can just go for a moment, imagine I'm living in the world and no one needs me. It's a shocking hollowness, right? And then experience the converse. I just got a call from the president of the United States. Pick your president, Trump, Obama, Biden. Let's not go there. Pick your president or prime minister of France, wherever you want to go, right? You get a call. And I got a call, let's say let's do Obama. I got a call from Obama. And it turns out that he kind of seems to know everything about me. And really subtly, my history, my past, my childhood, my unlived dreams, my, everything about me. And then Obama says to me, and you know what? Krista, I need your gifts, right? And the whole thing is in the balance, right? It's literally poised in the balance. And in order to tip the balance, this tipping point, I need your exact gifts. And Obama knows you so well that he describes your precise gifts. And you actually understand those precise gifts will actually ripple into, right, the cosmic field, right? And Obama explains, and you realize it's not right. You get off the phone depressed. You get off the phone with the first sense you have of genuine dignity, right? I'm dignified. I'm welcome in the universe. That's the paradox. I can't be welcome if I'm just practicing classical enlightenment. And I can't be welcome if I'm just practicing psychological transformation. And I can't be welcome if I'm just practicing kind of religious obedience. I can only be welcome and dignified if I'm actually participating in the evolution of God. That's the only way I can be welcome. All evil comes from human beings not feeling welcome in the universe, right? I'm not in the field, right? And that's the field of Eros. The field of Eros, I'm welcome. If I'm not welcome, I move to pseudo-Eros, right, to kind of cover up the lack of being welcome. So maybe just one last thing, and then we'll turn maybe, Andrew, if you're up for doing the last round, then we can. I think around 12 we'll open to questions. But I want to go to this desire thing that you raised, which I thought was so important. And I love how you described kind of this building up of desire over time. You can kind of get this image of kind of this building, right, of desire. And of course, the nature of desire is that if we state desire, it disappears. And if we actually bracket desire and let it build and emerge, right, then it grows and longing increases and deepens. Then, which is why delayed gratification is not just a moral principle, it's a principle of eros. And if I want to actually experience the fullness of desire, I allow the desire to deepen in me. And of course, in both East and right at the depth of cosmic Shaivism in Abhinavagupta, he'll talk about a stirring of desire in the infinite. It's a stunning, right, a stirring of desire in the infinite. And so this notion of desire is unimaginably important because desire, we identify desire with its fallen or degraded forms, with its superficial forms. That's like identifying sexuality with pornography. A mistake, right? In other words, right? And that's no. No, desire is what we would call, right, the field of the divine. The field of the divine itself is desire, but the process of being alive is the clarification of desire. What is the nature? What is my deepest heart's desire? And in Berur, B-E-R-R-U-R, right, in the lineage, in the subtle texts, right, is this process of, it's very hard to translate. It took me 10 years to translate that word, but the best translation is the clarification of desire. And I clarify to know what I desire. And in the end, I have two desires that are integrally one, that they're inseparable from each other. One is I have a desire for power. And I want to really name that because it's politically incorrect to name. So I have power, but actually there's a reason why God is called the infinity of power, right? Why did Barack Obama run for office? Power, right? The pleasure of power. Power is an intense pleasure. Now, of course, it can be exiled in its degraded form, the ring of Sauron, right? So Sauron is the abusive form of power. Its ultimate power is an ultimate seductive goal. But divinity is the infinity of power. Power means I want to impact. I want to actually impact. That's what it means. I don't want to be irrelevant. I want to be relevant. I want to impact, right? So Obama was ecstatic when he was in office because he would walk outside and he describes it. And he sees a kid and he says hello to a kid and he changes the kid's life. It's an enormously wondrous feeling. The capacity to impact, the pleasure of power, but of clarified power. And it's the power of loving. And this is where, with all due respect to Jimi Hendrix, for whom we have a lot of respect, Star Spangled Banner, right? Woodstock, there we were, right? I wasn't there, but I was too, but it was happening, right? And Hendrix got it wrong. He said, we got to get to a place where the power of love is greater than the love of power. Actually, love and power are not split. Actually, eros and power are actually the same. And my desire for power is the power to feed every hungry person, the power to embrace every child, the power to transform every broken heart, and the power to give the gift of the human being earning, if you will, their own ultimate dignity, their own ultimate freedom. And so in the deepest understanding of the realizers, as I've been able to understand and grasp it in my own body, and in the lineage, the hidden lineage texts, none of them are public, it is that actually, and this is a little bit where I think you're right, you went a little bit, you were playing, I think, Andrew, with Leela a little bit, right? And as you didn't name it, but it was in the background, the sense of this kind of play, this kind of sacred divine boredom, which says, okay, let's do something else now, which is very beautiful. And it's a very beautiful way to describe it, in the neurotic intentionality of the Hebrew wisdom text, right? Which, right, if I can play for a second, right? There's this sense of divinity's intensely powerful desire to give a gift in which I'm not just giving you full power and eros and love that you don't deserve, but allowing you to deserve it, right? Allowing you to own it, right? To own the gifts that I'm giving you. And that's called in the lineage, lachem kisufa. I don't want to give you the bread of shame. I want to give you something that you can own it. And so the owning it is, how do you own it? you gift me. I make myself vulnerable to you. And I say, oh my God, right? I can't be God without you making me God. And I limit myself and I say, I'm going to love you so much that I'm going to give you the capacity to hurt me. I'm giving you the capacity to choose, even when you choose against me.
Wow.
Right? I love you that much. Right? And it's like, so I'm giving you power. And maybe last sentence, Andrew, and I turn to you, brother, but this is what my anthropontology means. The mysteries are within us. We know that this is true. Right? In other words, if I love you, right, then if we can't find each other, we're like, right? So I'll close with this just personal image. So Andrew and I have known each other for a long time, but at different levels of closeness and intensity, sometimes farther apart for a few years. And the last, several as we've talked, not every day, not every week, not every month, but we were in dialogue. So if I write Andrew a note, or if Andrew writes me a note, and we don't get back to each other fairly soon, we're like, where did you go, right? Where did Marc go, right? It's like, because we're being intimate means I give you power over me, right? And that's what intimacy means, right? And so there's this God, the infinite intimate says, I so want to be intimate with you. I'm going to give you power over me. And more than just needing to talk to you, I'm giving you the power to make me more whole. And when you do that, you've now earned, as it were, the fullness of your own divinity. And my desire, my infinite, divine, desperate desire is to give you that gift. So that's this invitation, this demand that we participate in the evolution of God. And only in that context can we respond to the meta crisis. Because only in that context can a human being actually feel welcome in the universe and actually play out the gorgeousness of Eros and not be seduced into the demonized forms of pseudo-Eros, which lead directly, right, to existential risk, either the death of humanity or the death of our humanity.
What you're just describing demands that we honor the significance of relationship with each other on all levels at all times, and not allow there to be any lapses of attention and care or full responsiveness.
Right. And like no distance, right? It's like, it's that, and it's precious. It's precious.
So I wanted to respond to what we were speaking about a few minutes ago. But first, I wanted to just mention that I don't believe this is my conviction. This is Andrew's imperfect realization. So my conviction in the context of my imperfect realization is that God, being God, is incapable of being bored. And I'm saying this is my deepest intuitive conviction, which is inherently imperfect. But I wanted to just say that in terms of just, what would it be like to be God? And since I am God, I'm not separate from him and her. I don't think it's possible for me as him or her to ever be bored, but I could become curious about something else that was possible without ever experiencing a moment of boredom.
That's a good distinction, by the way, between curiosity and boredom. I think it's completely aligned in that distinction. It's a great distinction.
And that curiosity could, just as I was describing earlier, become more powerful, more profound, more demanding, more overwhelming until it led to its destination of the explosion of the creative process. So, and of course, I don't think God's capable of being bored because he or she is so inherently enraptured with his or her own natural state of being at all times, in all places, in all circumstances, that boredom would be an impossibility because he or she's always experiencing his or her own perfect delight and delightfulness. But I wanted to get back to your deeper point about the inherent obligation of awakening. That's what you were speaking about. I wanted to respond to that because I feel very much in alignment with what you were saying, and I feel this is a very, very important point. It's very simple, really, but because what a lot of people don't get in the age, in this postmodern moment of hyper psychologization of human experience, this hyper preoccupation with our our traumas and our pain and our fears and our suffering, we easily lose the plot. And then there's a God context in which gave rise to our being here, and which is running the show. But it's almost like we got stuck in a movie house that was showing bad reruns of movies, and we kind of forgot who we were, where we were going. So we got lost in the drama of our small selves, which is nothing new. And most people get lost in the drama of the small self and forget there's an infinite context that we're all participating in here, which we tend to forget about. So it's the spiritual awakening is the remembrance and the recognition of this cosmic context that we've been participating in from the very beginning. And in that remembrance, we rediscover our true nature, our divine nature, our inherent divinity, and the fullness of our divine nature and the fullness of our divinity and the glory of our divinity. And to get back to what you were saying, the inherent dignity of our divinity. And awakening to the inherent dignity of our divinity is, I believe, the ultimate solution to our neurosis, to our appalling shame, self-hatred, contempt, small-mindedness, pettiness, and loss and superficiality and kind of a meaningless existence. So I've been trying to tell people for 35 years that awakening to our inherent divinity is the solution. You don't have to work anything out really except that. If you work out your own inherent divinity, but you do it for real, so much of your guilt and your shame and your self-hatred and your unresolved emotional issues will find a resolution in being able to embrace the fullness of the inherent divinity which you're experiencing yourself. And but in order to do that, of course, we have to do what all the great realizers and religious realizers have done, which is we have to renounce, which means give up our attachment and identification with the small self, with its stories. And that's the problem. And I've seen a lot of people awaken to their own inherent divinity and realize their own inherent dignity. And suddenly sit up, suddenly without being told, suddenly sit up straight. And have a twinkle in their eye, and there's a fearlessness and an exuberance, and a huge yes begins to vibrate and permeate their whole being. Simply because they've realized that their own inherent divinity and their own inherent dignity, and all of the guilt and the shame and the fear and the doubt and the self-hatred and the small-mindedness suddenly vanished in light of that. And so this kind of awakening is a solution to the human predicament. It always has been, but it remains to be the answer to the human predicament, even in the midst of the complexity of the postmodern era or this metamodern moment, or even this time between worlds, as Zach likes to say. The awakening to our own inherent divinity is the ultimate solution for all of us personally, and at the highest level for all of us collectively. We expand out what that actually means and what the implications are. But I find so many of us seem to be so hypnotized by the story of the small self. It tends to suck up all of our attention and distract us most of the time, and we forget how inherently divine and how beautiful and how enlightened we can actually be, or always already are if we wake up to that fact. We don't need to suffer so much. We don't need to experience so much terrible suffering and so much grief and resentment. We just don't need to do. And now, along these same lines, what I realized a long time ago, and I continue to realize, and what I find most people just don't want to have anything to do with, is that the God principle, which is the sum totality of everything that exists and everything that does not exist, has, from an anthropomorphic sense, or the second face of God, the I, thou form of God, we realize that God as a divine being, one could say, at the level of experience, seems to want all of us, wants to devour all of us in love. It's very selfish. I love you, and I want all of you for my own self. But of course, God does not want us for selfish reasons. God wants us for unselfish reasons, because if we love him and her with all of our heart, unconditionally, radically, absolutely, completely, once and for all and forever, we will be serving that divine principle for the rest of our days. And we'll be serving that divine principle choicelessly, ecstatically, endlessly and ecstatically once and for all and forever. And when that begins to happen, as I was saying earlier, we realize this is the reason I was born. It was for this task, for this purpose, for this obedience to my true nature and to the ultimate nature that I've been born. And when we actually realize who we are at this non-relative ultimate level, it makes absolute meaning and purpose, and radically and ultimately and absolutely validates our existence in all our imperfection, as Marc and as Andrew. Which it's a total release, because it means I'm utterly perfect for the job I've come here to do. And all I've got to do now, my life's become very simple, is to do it with all my heart. That's all I need to do from now on, is to live this life as perfectly as I can, for the sake of this God principle. That's my liberation, that's my dharma, that's my destiny, that's my duty. And if I'm able to remain there and not swerve to the left and swerve to the right and be tempted and distracted and lost by other superficial possibilities, I will co-create the interior of the universe with the energy and intelligence that I created in the first place. And I'll know who I am. I'll always know who I am, and I'll know why I'm here, and I'll be doing the best I can for the sake of the whole. And when you realize that life becomes so simple, the human experience becomes so simple, the path ahead becomes so simple, all I have to do is put one foot in front of the other. I don't need to worry so much. I don't need to doubt so much. I just need to trust and trust and trust and trust and trust and give everything and be true and be true and be true. And the rest is out of our hands. But it can be so ridiculously simple. And I've seen so many people awaken to this beautiful, simple truth I'm trying to convey, and experience the dignity that you were talking about, and the self-respect, the automatic self-respect, and the glory of God, the glory and goodness of God, and experience that freedom instantaneously without having done any work. And then get distracted by this or that or something else, and then they fall from grace. They get lost back in their own story, fall back to earth. So it's hard to be simple. It's hard to be one-pointed and simple about all this. And then the religious life in earnest, I think, is keeping it simple. Every day, keeping it simple and one-pointed, simple, one-pointed, simple, and simple, absolute, and one-pointed, simple, absolute, and one-pointed, simple, absolute, and one-pointed. And I think we need to bring this more sophisticated understanding of what this non-relative or absolute dimension of reality actually means back into the picture, because a very sophisticated relative mind cannot cognize that which transcended, especially in its own absolute nature. It can't get it until, and only when it does will it understand half the things I've been saying. So now we've become so sophisticated that this absolute dimension of life, the absolute dimension of reality, this the domain of the God principle, has become harder and harder to reach, harder and harder to find, because we've become so smart and so sophisticated and so clever and so proud of our cleverness. It makes us all so much more difficult and so much more frightening. But I agree with you that now more than ever we need to awaken to these perennial truths to save ourselves, to save each other, to save the whole world. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And just one more word is that, as you've been saying, and as I've been saying, from the perspective of absolute non-duality, the creative principle needs us to do this. If you wonder who I'm pointing to you, everybody. That's the overwhelming truth from the perspective of absolute non-duality. Thou art that, you are it. So everything that we want to change and needs to change is completely dependent upon you or me, not on anybody else, not on a principle that exists outside you. And it's a metaphysical truth that, when embraced, will liberate you and overwhelm you and terrify you and inspire you, all at the same time, and make absolute meaningful out of your life. So I encourage everybody to try and follow these simple principles if you can, if you have the heart for it. But take it back home. And God needs you. God needs you. God needs you, guys. He needs all of us. She needs all of us. Desperately, urgently, radically, and completely. Once and for all and forever. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. And I'm beautiful. There's so much to say, but I'm thinking we'll hold here. and kind of open for questions. I began, and so it's good for you to finish. I don't want to do another piece, although what we feel is, just to say, right, there's at least 10 more critical things to clarify here, right? In other words, in terms of like what this experience is, and maybe it'll be for a different conversation. It's how do I experience my story? How do I experience my small self? How do I experience the love of God, right? This is one of the places where we cast and tell the story in complementary but different ways that are important. But let's hold here. This was wonderful and important. I just want to note that we really focused on the evolution of God. We didn't focus on evolutionary perennialism. We kind of got through with the first kind of third. We didn't talk about evolutionary enlightenment, but we did focus on the first of the three terms of the evolution of God in a beautiful and gorgeous way. And I'm glad we did, because everything of course flows from it, but we did great. So I'm thinking it's 12:12, right? And and I'm hoping that maybe a couple of the questions, if there are questions, will allow us to maybe kind of elucidate or kind of clarify some of the things that are so critical to clarify here. And again, if we can't, we live inside of a story, but it's a true story, a story of value. And we're trying to just clarify the plot lines of the story here, right? So that we actually know what it means to be a divine actor in this story, right? In this way, and the only way that there's ultimate dignity. So anybody, Krista or Danielle, I don't know how so let's maybe we'll look at the chat box. Yeah, please, Krista.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Andrew. Oh, sorry for that. The dog hears something.
Good.
So that was very powerful. Thank you so much. And please, for everybody, please write your questions in the chat box. And we already have a few questions, so I can start to read the first one from Pramod. Pramod is saying, in the sense of how the descending of divinity is dignifying, which brings about the wholeness of the experience, how are we able to translate this more into our relative selves and in worldly exchanges where it might not always seem conducive to do this as per how the outer situation is perceived in some moments?
Yay, fantastic. So maybe Andrew, I'll pick it up and pass it to you. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay. So that's great. Thank you. It's one of the things that I thought was really a great thing and a critical thing to clarify, which is how do we look at our story, right? And this is a very, very essential thing. And so Andrew and I absolutely agree, if I can speak for us, and you'll correct and disagree if you disagree, of course, that there is a story that needs to be moved beyond, right? Which is a story which is what I would call kind of recursive patterns. You're stuck in a loop. You can't get out of it. The chatter, right, of the petty and contracted mind. And I remember when I first, entered into kind of the rabbi world, which I was in for several decades, and it's still kind of my original ground. A couple came to me, and I was like 23, and they had this big argument, and I realized they were arguing about something that happened 37 years ago. And I was a rabbi in Florida. And I realized this didn't happen yesterday. This happened 37 years ago. And that's why are we talking about this, right? And there was a pseudo eros, right, in kind of reliving the conflict, right? And that's the kind of story we need to move beyond. There's a deeper version of story, and I think that addresses your question. And that story is the story that the book of creation, it's the original text of Western lineages, right? It's about 455 words, right? And it says that reality is sapphire, which is kind of the blue field of enlightened presence. And reality is also Sipur, story. And I call that the ontology of story, meaning that my story is actually real. And there's a way to live those same traumas, right? And those same unique qualities of intimacy and the unique plot line of my life, which is how the plot lines of cosmos play out in my life, and the unique interchanges and the conflicts and the places that I was born and the places that I fell, and my unique qualities of shadow. All of that becomes the stuff of my sacred autobiography. And it's not that I leave that behind. It's that itself becomes the playground of the divine mind, right? The very sacred and serious playground, right, in the world, which happens through my unique story. In other words, it's not that there's kind of like this. There's story that I need to leave behind, story, level one. Level two is non-story. I need to leave that behind. Or level one is the personal, level two is the impersonal. But then level three is story again, right? And in the personal again, right? Unique self, evolutionary unique self, right? In other words, meaning it's the radical embrace of my story, right? As a chapter and verse in the story of God, right? And so then I'm not going back and engaging my trauma as pseudo-eros, right? And so much of the approach to trauma comes from Freud and how he talks about inhibition, but Freud was a materialist. So Freud, by definition, is dealing with pseudo-eros because there is no field of the infinite, right? There's not a possibility. I'm not a discretion of the infinite intimate into the unique qualities of intimacy of my life, that if I work out and transform those and evolve those intimacies, I've evolved God. That wasn't a possibility for Freud, right? In any sense, shape, or form, right? And nor was it for kind of virtually all of Western psychology. So there's a way to engage trauma, not as a place in which I'm lost in recursive loops, but trauma is what the Kabbalah calls the original Shvirat HaKelim, the original breaking. The breaking of the heart and the breaking of the vessels. And only when my heart breaks does my heart open, right? And so actually all of this is played out. All of these are just words until I live them in the stories of my life and the stories of our lives. So we actually, ultimately there's no split in the absolute and the relative. That's what non-duality means. Non-duality means there's no split between them. You can't split between them. Right? There's a relative split between between the absolute and the relative, but ultimately there's no split, right? It's absolute and relative all the way up and all the way down, if you will, or interiors and exteriors all the way up and all the way down, right? That's the nature of reality. And so therefore the way I actually, the way I return to the marketplace in the 10th Oxford picture of Buddhism, for example, right? Or in, a more advanced version of what we're calling unique self, right? And perhaps that's the way authentic self is taught today. I don't know how you're teaching authentic self today, but it's that sense in which the personal and the evolutionary impulse actually meet in the deepest sense. And we can actually have, I'm going to tease my friend Andrew for a second, we can actually have a personal enlightenment fellowship. It's a subtleties just between us, right? We can have a personal enlightenment, fellowship, which is the personal beyond the personal. Something like that. Andrew, that's how I would begin to approach that. Thank you.
I'll just give a short answer to Pramod because I think there are other questions. So Pramod, I think that you have to learn to respect other people's boundaries because most people are only receptive and available as they can be. And if we can feel that they're not going to be receptive and available to our own deeper depths and radiance, then we should maybe keep it to ourselves. But that being said, I believe that if we're true seekers and true finders, I think we should have the courage to live our realization, to live our spirituality in public. We should have the courage to come out of the closet. So in the West, 20, 30 years ago, when a homosexual would decide to be honest and transparent about their sexual identity, they were what's called coming out of the closet. So they would be transparent about their sexual preferences. And I think that the problem is that most of us live in secular societies that are fundamentally materialistic by nature. And so speaking about deep spiritual convictions are seen as being a form of madness or insanity or stupidity. So I think that at a certain point, as your realization becomes strong, you develop what I call spiritual self-confidence. You have to have the courage to live your realization in public and not worry so much about what other people think. If you have the courage for it, but you only can do this if you have the courage to stand strong in what you know and not so concerned with other people's thoughts. So the stronger that you are, you want to be able to be a threat to their materialistic, conscious or unconscious convictions because you love them. But you have to know how to handle this and have to handle these things and kind of hit the nail right on the head and be very accurate and appropriate in the way we behave, which takes a long time to learn. I'm still learning these things.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is from Krista. She is asking, I am still curious about the differences between evolutionary perennialism and evolutionary enlightenment and what Andrew and Marc actually mean in their view.
That's a hard one, simply because it's a great question, simply because we focused on the evolution of God, right? And we didn't focus on either the term evolutionary enlightenment or the term evolutionary perennialism. But it's 12:21. Maybe I'll say, a 2-minute summation of evolutionary perennialism, and maybe Andrew will give us an allusion, 90-second allusion to evolutionary perennialism and a 90-second allusion you can't summarize to evolutionary enlightenment. So we'll just actually see them for a second, if that's helpful, right? So evolutionary perennialism, in a word, right, is the perennial philosophy, right, was this great attempt of modernity to say that there are universal shared truths. Right? That has been massively attacked by the academy. But the assumption of the kind of intelligentsia, that's simply not true. That's actually an illusion. And that actually, if you actually get the particularity of history, right, and you get the sense that they're not shared truths, there's socially constructed truths, and they're by definition not universal. And these perennial truths, for example, about emptiness, right, that there's the shared sense of, right, emptiness meaning shunyata, meaning enlightenment, even those, right, people like Jeffrey Kripal will point out, were so radically different in every different culture, right, and they meant such different things that any notion of trying to kind of describe them as universals is basically silly and absurd, because the notion of historical context and evolution destroys them. Right? There's not absolute shared truths. Right? There's not an absolute shared truth called love. Love is constantly evolving, and love means one thing 2,000 years ago, it means another thing now. And you call them both love, but that's nonsense. So perennialism on 2 of those counts, and we don't have time now, but on 6 other counts, perennialism got destroyed. Right? And what we're saying is that actually you can respond to each one of those critiques, but at the core of the response, let's just respond to one of them, which I mentioned, the split between eternal perennial truths and evolving truths. So in a word, what we say is that the eternal Tao is the evolving Tao, in a sense. That there's a Tao, there's a ground, and in that ground is both eternity and evolution. That eternity is not everlasting time, it's that which is beneath time. That which is beneath time is the ground for that which evolves. And so evolutionary perennialism means we're actually saying the perennialists in modernity got something right. They shouldn't have been dismissed. We can actually reclaim the perennial tradition. We can trace it actually all the way back and all the way forward, right, in time, and find early proto-perennialists. We can respond, right, to the critiques of modernity and post-modernity, which are in part true, respond powerfully, and articulate a new vision of a shared universal grammar of value, evolutionary perennialism, in a word. That was 2.5 minutes, and whatever time Andrew needs, take, please. But that was just because we made that promise. So, Krista, I appreciate you bringing it up. That's in a word, right? A sense of it. Fair?
I have no idea how to respond to the question.
Well, can you give Andrew give Krista and anyone else just an allusion to, like I just gave an allusion, the fragrance of it.
I agree with everything you just said.
Right.
I think Marc is pointing to a description, Andrew, of 90 seconds of evolutionary enlightenment in comparison to what Marc just said.
Or just the different door in that it's going. It agrees. I think it as you and I talked on, I think Saturday, it overlaps and everything, but it's a different door, which is particularly the door of enlightenment, right? I think if I can give you a hint. You look at Andrew Cohen's book, right? Evolutionary Enlightenment, and there's the whole thing on kind of authentic self, and just a hint.
I literally don't know how to respond. I think we're more together than.
Okay, perfect. So let's bracket that. And we'll come back to it. But Krista, it was a great and legitimate inquiry. So you shouldn't feel you just.
Legitimate question. Question.
Yeah,
No,
legitimate.
I was just curious how they differ, or what you would mean by evolutionary enlightenment, Andrew. I don't know that term, so.
Right. So,
Okay, I can explain what evolutionary enlightenment means because in the traditional
Please.
Eastern enlightenment, the grounded being, which Mark was just speaking about, which is the eternal void that exists prior to time, before space. There's only this empty ground, or the ground of being, and it's a perennial depth dimension that is eternal, and it exists eternally for eternity, and it is unknowable by the mind, and because it's a state, and it's a no place that exists prior to time, prior to mind, prior to any kind of existence of any kind. It's a place of unimaginable, inconceivable freedom and liberation and infinitude. It can only be known by direct experience. So some of the greatest Eastern realizers, like the Buddha himself, and in modern times, Ramana Maharshi and others, and in today's world, it would be Eckhart Tolle, speak very eloquently about the grounded being because they have deeply realized and deeply grasped it. So the Buddha felt, and most of the great Eastern realizers feel, that the grounded being, this infinite no place that exists prior to the world and prior to time, is real because it's eternal and unchanging. And they feel that the created world, the manifest reality, what we call the evolutionary process or the creative process, is unreal because it's changing, and it's a place where birth and death exists. Also, the grounded being, there's no birth, there's no death, there's no coming, there's no going, there's nothing. Nothing happens there, and that they say that's the realm of the real. And they felt that the world of change and the world of becoming, the world we call the creative process, is seen as being unreal and relative, and a place you want to escape from. So, in the traditional Eastern Dharma, you want to escape from manifest existence, which means you want to escape from identification with the body, with the mind, with desire. The Buddha spoke a lot about that. And you want to get out of here. You want to go to that heaven that exists before the universe was even a thought, and then rising in the mind of God. So in Eastern Enlightenment, the idea was to escape manifest reality, escape time, and escape space, escape the world of form and mind. And some of these greatest realizers actually did that. But when you realize that the energy and intelligence that created the universe, the God principle, what Marx calls eros, that God, as this grounded being, created the world of time and space, created the whole universe, realized that the God principle wants the universe to exist. And as a matter of fact, the universe, the creative process, is God in manifest form. The becoming of the universe is God taking form, and is as much God as the unmanifest is. And when you realize that if God didn't want to create the universe wouldn't exist. So the universe only exists because God wanted it to exist, which means it's inherently divine, inherently meaningful and purposeful, as we were speaking about earlier. So therefore, in the evolutionary enlightenment, we realize that our enlightenment now is not found by escaping from the world, but by, as in the ways we were just speaking of earlier, there's our dharma and our destiny is to co-create the world with the God principle, as the God principle, not to escape from it, not to shy away from it, not to run away from it, not to be free from it, but to help it to evolve as us and through us. So it's a different interpretation of the meaning and significance of enlightenment and spiritual realization, which transcends but includes the grounded being. The grounded being is the foundation of the totality of all reality, at all times and all places of all circumstances. But now we're embracing the manifest existence as equally part of God and who we are. So that's why it's evolutionary enlightenment. And we realize, as in the ways that Mark and I were speaking about earlier, that this realization means my destiny as awakening to the God principle, as the evolutionary impulse, is to co-create the interior of the universe with and as the energy and intelligence that gave rise to it in the first place. So it's not about escape. It's not about escape anymore. It's about co-creation.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do that. And Krista, I appreciate it, Andrew. And Krista, we're both appreciating your question. And of course, we didn't give it justice, but we at least, touched the fragrance. So we're at 12:30. We're at 12:30.
Yes, and we don't have any more questions, so it's all perfect. Thank you so much.
What a delight. What a delight, everyone.
That was fun.
Super great. Super fun and super, in the best of both
Beautiful.
We got that music coming on?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody.